Thomas Reed wiped sweat from his brow as he adjusted the thermal imaging equipment. Mount Colima had been showing increased activity for weeks, and as the lead volcanologist at the Pacific Rim Research Station, he needed to determine if evacuation protocols should be initiated for the nearby islands. "Base camp, I'm heading closer to the eastern vent to get better readings," he reported into his radio. "The magma chamber pressure is higher than yesterday's models predicted." "Copy that, Thomas," came the crackling response from Director Patel. "Be careful. Tremor frequency has doubled in the last hour." Thomas secured his protective gear and helmet before traversing the narrow ridge that led toward the volcano's eastern slope. The air shimmered with heat, sulfuric gases stinging his nostrils despite his mask. This close to the caldera, the ground itself seemed alive, pulsing, breathing, warning. His equipment detected a strange anomaly, a heat signature about 50 meters ahead that didn't match typical volcanic patterns. Curious, Thomas adjusted his course to investigate. The sight that greeted him defied all logic. Half concealed behind a rock formation was a woman, unconscious and clearly injured. Her skin had an unusual bluish tint that Thomas initially attributed to the play of light through the volcanic gases. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Thomas called out, rushing to her side. No response. What was anyone doing this deep in an exclusion zone? The nearest settlement was miles away, and access to the volcano had been restricted to research personnel for weeks. The ground shuddered beneath them, a warning tremor. Thomas checked his instruments. Magma was rising rapidly. They had minutes, not hours. "Base camp, I've found an injured woman near the eastern vent," he radioed urgently. "Requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Only static answered him. The mountain's electromagnetic interference had strengthened, cutting off communications. Thomas checked the woman's pulse, present but weak. When he gently turned her to assess her injuries, he noticed something extraordinary. What he'd mistaken for unusual clothing appeared to be partly integrated with her skin, iridescent material that seemed to shift colors in the volcanic light. Another tremor, stronger this time, sent rocks tumbling down the slope nearby. Thomas had no time to puzzle over the woman's strange appearance. He needed to get them both off this mountain immediately. "I'm going to move you," he told her, though she remained unconscious. "I'm sorry if this hurts." As he lifted her, her eyes fluttered open, startlingly violet against her blue-tinged skin. "The crystal matrix," she murmured in perfect English, though with an accent he couldn't place. "They've destabilized it." "Don't worry about that now," Thomas said, assuming she was delirious. "We need to get you to safety." The woman grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No, you don't understand. The eruption, it's not natural." Before Thomas could respond, the ground heaved violently beneath them. A fissure opened just yards away, venting superheated gas that would have engulfed them had Thomas not pulled them both behind a large boulder. "We have to move now," he insisted, lifting her again. This time she didn't protest. The descent was treacherous. Twice they nearly fell when sections of the path crumbled away. The woman's condition seemed to improve remarkably as they moved. By the halfway point, she was able to walk with his support. "I'm Thomas," he said during a brief pause to check their route. "Vela," she replied, studying him with those unsettling violet eyes. "You risk your life for a stranger." "It's my job to understand volcanoes, not to die on them," Thomas said with a grim smile. "Besides, I couldn't just leave you there. Where I come from, such selflessness is rare," Vela said softly. A massive explosion rocked the mountain above them, sending a plume of ash skyward. The pyroclastic flow would follow within minutes. "We need to reach the research vehicle," Thomas urged, pointing to where his reinforced all-terrain vehicle was parked a quarter-mile below. They half ran, half stumbled down the remaining slope, reaching the vehicle just as the deadly cloud of superheated gas and ash began racing down the mountainside. Thomas gunned the engine, driving them away from the eruption as fast as the rugged terrain would allow. Looking in the rearview mirror at the apocalyptic scene behind them, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed irrevocably. Beside him, Vela watched not the eruption, but him, with an expression that mingled gratitude, curiosity, and something that looked strangely like recognition. The research station's medical bay was sparse but functional. Thomas cleaned and bandaged the few visible wounds on Vela's arms and face, though she insisted they were minor. Director Patel had wanted to evacuate her to the mainland hospital, but Vela had adamantly refused, claiming an unusual allergy to certain medications. "Your vital signs are remarkably stable for someone who just survived a volcanic eruption," Thomas noted, reading the medical scanner's output. "Are you sure you don't want proper medical attention?" Vela smiled enigmatically. "I heal quickly. A trait from my mother's side." 3 days had passed since the rescue, and Kalima's eruption had stabilized into a steady, manageable flow rather than the cataclysmic event Thomas had feared. The research team was busy collecting unprecedented data, but Thomas found himself increasingly distracted by their mysterious guest. "You never explained what you were doing on an active volcano," he said one evening as they sat on the station's observation deck, watching the distant glow of lava against the night sky. "I was studying it, not unlike you," Vela replied, her violet eyes reflecting the molten light. "Though perhaps from a different perspective." "You're a volcanologist?" Thomas asked, surprised. "Not exactly." She leaned forward, pointing to a specific spot on the volcano's eastern flank. "The magma chamber extends further than your instruments show. There's a secondary chamber here, connected by a narrow channel that your scanning technology can't detect." Thomas frowned. "That's impossible. We've mapped the entire subsurface structure." "May I?" Vela asked, gesturing to his tablet. He handed it to her, watching as her fingers danced across the surface with surprising familiarity. Within minutes, she had reconfigured his mapping algorithm and produced a new model that showed exactly the formation she had described. "How did you?" Thomas began. "Run your scans again tomorrow. You'll see I'm right." She returned the tablet, her fingers brushing against his. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through his body. The next day's data confirmed Vela's prediction with stunning accuracy. Thomas stared at the results in disbelief while Director Patel questioned how they had missed such a significant feature. "Your guest seems to know more about volcanoes than our entire research team," Patel remarked with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. "Who exactly is she, Thomas?" "I wish I knew," he admitted. That evening, Thomas found Vela standing alone on the beach, staring up at the stars. The moonlight gave her blue-tinged skin an ethereal glow. "You were right about the magma chamber," he said, approaching her. "Just like you were right about the eruption not being natural." Vela turned to him, her expression softening. "You believe me now?" "I believe there's more to you than you're telling me." Thomas stepped closer. "Your knowledge, your rapid healing, even the way your skin sometimes seems to change in different light. You're not from around here, are you?" A sad smile played across her lips. "No, Thomas. I'm not." "Are you going to elaborate on that, or should I start guessing?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light despite the impossible theories forming in his mind. Instead of answering, Vela reached out and took his hand, guiding it to the side of her neck where he felt a subtle, rhythmic pulsation, not quite a human pulse. "3 hearts," she said quietly. "Smaller than yours, but more efficient." Thomas felt his own single heart racing. "Who are you, Vela?" Someone who never expected to find connection on this mission. She moved closer, her eyes searching his. Someone who certainly never expected to feel this way about an Earth scientist. The kiss happened naturally, as inevitable as gravity. Her lips were warmer than he expected, soft and tasting faintly of something like cinnamon. Thomas pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her strange, midnight blue hair. When they finally parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I've never kissed an alien before," he whispered, half joking, half serious. "How was it?" she asked, a playful smile illuminating her features. "Otherworldly," he replied, making her laugh. They walked along the shoreline as Vela explained fragments of her truth. She was part of a research team studying Earth's geothermal activity, using technology far beyond human capability. Her people had been observing Earth for centuries, though direct contact was strictly forbidden. "So what went wrong?" Thomas asked. "Why were you alone and injured on that volcano?" A shadow crossed her face. "Not everything was an accident. I've suspected sabotage since." Her words were cut short by the sudden appearance of lights on the horizon, not stars or aircraft, but something descending rapidly from the upper atmosphere. "They found me," Vela whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We need to go. Now." "Who's found you?" Thomas demanded, but she was already pulling him back toward the research station with surprising strength. "People who want me silenced," she said urgently. "People who would think nothing of eliminating you and everyone at this station if it meant capturing me." "Why? What makes you so valuable to them?" Vela stopped, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that took his breath away. "Because on my world, I'm not just a researcher, Thomas. I'm the heir to the high sovereignty of the 7 systems. And there are those who would prefer I never take the throne." In the distance, the lights grew brighter as they approached Earth's surface. Thomas looked from them to Vela, the impossible woman who had fallen into his life from the stars, and made his decision. "Then we'd better make sure they don't find you," he said, taking her hand and leading her toward the station's transport bay. Whatever came next, he knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same again. Neither would his heart. The research station's transport, a rugged all-terrain vehicle designed for volcanic environments, roared to life as Thomas punched in the ignition sequence. Beside him, Vela worked quickly to disable the vehicle's tracking system. "They'll be monitoring all Earth communications and transportation networks," she explained, her fingers manipulating the wiring beneath the dashboard with practiced precision. "We need to stay off the grid." Thomas glanced at the night sky through the windshield. The lights they'd spotted earlier had disappeared, but he knew that didn't mean the threat was gone. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked, accelerating down the coastal road away from the station. "There's a place in the mountains," Vela said. "A cavern system with high concentrations of rare earth minerals that should mask my bioelectrical signature. It's why I chose this region for my research in the first place, somewhere to hide if necessary." As they drove through the night, Vela explained more about her situation. She was the daughter of the current sovereign of the 7 systems, a confederation of worlds that had achieved interstellar travel thousands of years before humans had invented the wheel. Her mother had died under mysterious circumstances 2 cycles ago, and since then, Vela had been investigating a faction within the Royal Council that she believed was responsible, a faction led by her father's advisor, Lord Thaxus. "I discovered evidence of their plan to destabilize governments across multiple systems," she said, her voice tight with anger. "The volcanic manipulations on Earth were just a test of their technology. They intend to trigger natural disasters on populated worlds to create chaos, allowing them to install puppet leaders loyal to them. And the accident on the volcano wasn't an accident," Thomas concluded. "No. They sabotaged my equipment and triggered the eruption prematurely. If you hadn't found me." She didn't finish the sentence. Dawn was breaking as they reached the mountain range. Thomas navigated the increasingly rough terrain, following Vela's directions until they reached what appeared to be a solid rock face. "There's nothing here," he said, confused. Vela smiled and reached into her pocket, removing what looked like a smooth stone. When she pressed her thumb against it, the stone glowed with internal light, and a previously invisible opening appeared in the rock face. Perception filtering, she explained at Thomas's astonished expression. Simple technology, really. The cavern beyond was spacious and, to Thomas's surprise, equipped with what appeared to be a small living space, a sleeping area, stored supplies, and equipment he couldn't begin to identify. You've been preparing for this, he realized. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but royal politics taught me to always have a contingency plan. Vela activated several devices around the cavern, creating what she called a defensive perimeter. We should be safe here for at least a few days, she said, finally allowing herself to relax slightly. Thank you, Thomas. You didn't have to involve yourself in my problems. Thomas stepped closer to her, taking her hands in his. I'm not sure I had much choice. Not since I found you on that volcano. Their kiss was deeper this time, filled with the urgency of their situation and the growing connection between them. Vela's body pressed against his, surprisingly human in its warmth and softness despite the subtle differences in texture and coloration. They found their way to the sleeping area, hands exploring each other with increasing boldness. Thomas hesitated briefly, uncertain about the differences between their species, but Vela guided him with confidence, showing him where her sensitivity was greatest. Are you sure about this? He whispered against her neck, where the triple pulse of her heart quickened beneath his lips. I've never been more certain of anything, she replied, pulling him down to her. Their lovemaking was a discovery of similarities and differences, her skin emitting a faint luminescence when aroused, the pattern of stars that seemed to appear across her shoulders as her passion mounted. Thomas kissed every illuminated inch, marveling at this woman from beyond the stars who had somehow found her way into his arms. Afterward, they lay together in the dim light of the cavern, Vela's head resting on his chest as she listened to his single human heart. On my world, this would be considered quite scandalous, she murmured with a smile in her voice. The royal heir consorting with a species considered primitive by council standards. Primitive, huh? Thomas raised an eyebrow. I didn't hear any complaints a few minutes ago. Vela laughed and propped herself up to look at him. The council has no idea what they're missing. Her expression grew serious. Thomas, when my people find us, and they will eventually, you'll be in danger just for knowing about our existence, let alone. She gestured between them. I'm already in danger, he pointed out. Might as well make it worthwhile. She traced the line of his jaw tenderly. There may be a solution. If I can reach my loyalists, prove what Thaxis has done, reclaim my position. I could grant you protected status. Is that like a royal consort? He teased. Something like that, she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. They spent the next 2 days planning and preparing. Vela modified some of her equipment to detect approaching ships, while Thomas analyzed the volcanic data they'd brought, looking for evidence of the artificial triggering mechanism Vela had mentioned. On the 3rd day, the alarm sounded, a high-pitched tone from one of Vela's devices. They're here, she said grimly, activating a holographic display that showed 3 small craft landing in a formation around the mountain. Thaxis sent his elite guard. Thomas watched the display with growing dread as figures emerged from the craft, humanoid but moving with an unnatural fluidity, carrying weapons unlike anything he'd seen before. We need to move deeper into the cavern system, Vela said, gathering essential equipment. There's another exit on the far side of the mountain. They had just finished packing when a massive explosion shook the cavern, sending rocks crashing down around them. The defensive perimeter had been breached. Run! Vela shouted, grabbing Thomas's hand. They fled deeper into the tunnel system as energy weapons fired behind them, the shots illuminating the darkness with brilliant flashes of purple light. Thomas felt the heat of a near miss against his shoulder as they rounded a corner. There's a chamber ahead with a natural chimney, Vela panted as they ran. If we can reach it, I can send a signal to my allies. They burst into the chamber she described, a vast space with a narrow shaft extending upward to the open sky. Vela immediately began assembling a device from components in her pack. "I need 2 minutes," she said urgently. "We might not have 2 minutes," Thomas replied, picking up a piece of fallen technology from Vela's pack, something that looked vaguely like a weapon. "Do you know how to use that?" she asked, not pausing in her work. "Point and hope," he suggested with a grim smile. The sound of pursuers grew louder in the tunnel behind them. Thomas positioned himself at the entrance to the chamber, the alien weapon feeling strange but somehow right in his hands. When the first of Thaxus's guards appeared, Thomas squeezed what he assumed was the trigger. The weapon discharged a wave of force that sent the guard flying backward into his companions. Thomas felt a surge of triumph, followed immediately by panic as more guards appeared, these wearing some kind of protective field that shimmered around them. "Vela, whatever you're doing, hurry," he called, firing again with less effect. "Almost there," she replied, making a final adjustment to her device. The guards advanced into the chamber, weapons raised. Thomas prepared for the worst, but instead of firing, the guards suddenly froze, then lowered their weapons and knelt. Confused, Thomas turned to Vela and found her surrounded by a projection of light, her appearance transformed. Gone was the simple clothing she'd worn since he'd met her. In its place was an elaborate suite of armor-like garments that seemed to flow around her body like liquid metal. On her forehead, a symbol burned with cold fire. "The royal sigil," one of the guards said, voice filled with awe. "The true heir." Behind them, new figures entered the chamber, these wearing uniforms marked with symbols matching the one on Vela's forehead. They quickly secured the kneeling guards. One of the newcomers stepped forward and bowed deeply to Vela. "Your Highness, we received your signal. The royal guard stands ready to escort you home." Vela nodded regally, every inch the royalty she truly was. Then she turned to Thomas, her expression softening. "This is Thomas Reed," she said to the guard captain. "He saved my life and has my complete trust. He is under my personal protection." The captain looked at Thomas with new interest. "Very well, Your Highness." He bowed again. "The transport is ready whenever you are." As the guards and prisoners were led away, Vela approached Thomas, taking his hands in hers. "Now you see me as I truly am," she said quietly. Not just Vela the researcher, but Vela, Crown Princess of the Seven Systems. Thomas looked into her violet eyes, still the same despite the royal trappings. "I think I prefer just Vela," he said with a small smile. "The woman I found on a volcano." She touched his face gently. "That woman still exists. But now we must leave Earth. Will you come with me, Thomas? To a world beyond your imagination?" The question hung between them, filled with possibility and uncertainty. Thomas thought of everything he would be leaving behind, his work, his world, everything familiar. And everything he might gain, knowledge, adventure, and most importantly, Vela herself. His answer would change everything. "Yes," Thomas said without hesitation. "I'll come with you." The journey to Vela's ship took them through hidden tunnels that opened onto a secluded mountain valley. There, cloaked by technology that bent light around its hull, waited a vessel unlike anything human eyes had ever seen. Sleek and crystalline, it pulsed with colors Thomas couldn't even name. Inside, the ship was a marvel of organic technology. Surfaces responded to touch, lighting pathways as they moved through corridors. The crew, all with the same bluish skin as Vela, regarded Thomas with undisguised curiosity but treated him with respect. "We've never had a human aboard," explained Commander Ren, Vela's security chief. "You're a historical anomaly." Launch was nothing like Earth's thunderous rockets. Instead, a subtle vibration passed through the ship, and suddenly they were accelerating beyond the atmosphere with barely any sensation of movement. Thomas watched through a viewing portal as Earth became a blue marble, then a distant point of light. "It's beautiful," he whispered, struck by the enormity of what he was leaving behind. Vela stood beside him, dressed in flowing garments woven from what looked like liquid starlight. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked, her hand finding his. "No," he said firmly. "Just paying my respects. That world made me who I am." Their journey would take 3 Earth days, an astonishingly short time to cross what Vela described as 17 light-years. During that time, she prepared Thomas for what awaited him on her homeworld, Lemuria. The royal palace is located within the capital city of Selenar, she explained as they studied holographic maps. "We'll be arriving during the Festival of Ascension, so the city will be crowded with visitors. Our arrival will be less conspicuous." "Won't a human be somewhat conspicuous regardless?" Thomas asked. "Less than you might think. The 7 systems include dozens of humanoid species. Your appearance is unusual but not shockingly so." Nights brought relief from the lessons in alien politics, as he and Vela found comfort in each other's arms. Their lovemaking grew more confident as they learned each other's bodies, Thomas discovering the unique sensitivities of Vela's physiology, the neural cluster at her spine that caused her entire body to illuminate when touched just right. In turn, she explored him with equal fascination. "Your skin feels like fire against mine," she whispered one night. "Human body temperature runs hotter than mine. I never knew such heat could be so addictive." On the final day of their journey, Thomas received medical modifications, a respiratory implant to filter toxic elements in Lemuria's atmosphere, an injection to help his eyes adjust to the different light spectrum, and a subcutaneous translator. "This is a lot to take in," Thomas admitted as they completed the procedures. "I know," Vela said softly. "You're giving up so much, stepping into a world that wasn't made for you." Thomas silenced her with a kiss. "Not a chance. I'm exactly where I want to be." Arrival at Lemuria came with startling suddenness. One moment they were in fold space, and the next, a magnificent world filled the viewing portals, a planet of sweeping oceans in teal and violet, land masses covered in forests and cities that sparkled like jewels. Their landing was conducted in secrecy at a private facility. As they disembarked, Thomas felt the first breath of alien air, slightly sweeter than Earth's, with hints of spice and electricity. A small delegation greeted them, led by an elegant woman whose resemblance to Vela was unmistakable despite her silver hair. "Aunt Lyris," Vela said warmly. "Your message reached us just in time." "The council grows more bold by the day," Lyris replied. "Thaxus has consolidated his power. He's scheduled your father's abdication ceremony for the final day of the festival." Vela's expression hardened. "We have 3 days to stop him." Lyris finally acknowledged Thomas with a curious gaze. "And this is Thomas Reed," Vela said, her voice taking on a formal quality. "He saved my life on Earth. He is under my protection and has my complete trust." Lyris studied him with keen eyes before nodding slightly. "Welcome to Lemuria, Thomas Reed of Earth. I hope your arrival marks the beginning of better days for our world." As they were escorted to a waiting transport, Thomas caught Vela looking at him with an unreadable expression. "Having second thoughts about bringing me?" he asked quietly. "Never," she said, taking his hand. "But I fear what lies ahead. Thaxus will stop at nothing to prevent me from taking the throne." "Then we'll stop him together," Thomas replied with more confidence than he felt. The transport rose silently into the alien sky, carrying them toward a capital city that gleamed like a constellation brought to Earth, and toward a confrontation that would determine not only their future together but the fate of 7 worlds. Selenar was a city of impossible architecture, spires that defied gravity, buildings that seemed to flow like water frozen in time, all illuminated by lights that danced between structures like living things. Thomas would have been awestruck if not for the tension that hung over their small group as they moved through back passages and hidden tunnels beneath the capital. "The royal residence has been compromised," Lyris explained as they gathered in a safe house. Thaxis has placed his loyalists throughout the palace guard. And my father? Vela asked, her voice tight with concern. Alive, but heavily medicated. Thaxis claims it's for his health. Thomas watched as Vela paced the room, royal composure momentarily set aside. When she turned back to face them, determination blazed in her violet eyes. We need the evidence I collected on Earth, proof of Thaxis's volcanic manipulations and his attempt on my life. With that, I can challenge him before the Council of Elders. The Council remains neutral, Lyris cautioned. They'll require irrefutable proof. Thomas cleared his throat. The data is still on my tablet. I analyzed the seismic patterns before we left Earth. If the volcanic technology works how you described, I can demonstrate the artificial trigger points. Vela's face lit up. Thomas, you're brilliant. She kissed him quickly, ignoring her aunt's raised eyebrow. The plan they formed was dangerous but direct. The final day of the Festival of Ascension would culminate in a public ceremony where Vela's father would officially abdicate, naming Thaxis regent until a new sovereign was selected. They would interrupt the ceremony with their evidence, forcing a council judgment before the assembled representatives of all 7 systems. The night before the ceremony, Vela came to Thomas in his quarters. She wore simple clothing, her royal insignia absent. Tomorrow changes everything, she said softly, sitting beside him on the sleeping platform. If we succeed, I become sovereign. My duties to the 7 systems will define my life. Thomas took her hand. I understand what that means for us. She looked at him with such vulnerability that his heart ached. I don't want to lose you, Thomas. But a sovereign cannot simply take a consort from an unaligned world. Instead of answering, Thomas pulled her close and kissed her deeply. They made love with a desperation born of uncertainty, her body illuminating beneath his touch like a galaxy coming to life, her lips whispering his name like a prayer to unknown stars. Afterward, held in the circle of his arms, Vela traced patterns on his chest. There might be a way, she murmured. Not tradition, but precedent exists. An Earth ambassador to the 7 systems. Thomas smiled. Ambassador Reed. Has a nice ring to it. Dawn brought the day of reckoning. Disguised as festival attendees, they infiltrated the Grand Plaza where the abdication ceremony was to take place. Thousands of citizens and representatives from across the systems gathered to witness the historic transition. When Thaxis appeared with Vela's father, frail and disoriented, Thomas felt Vela tense beside him. The ceremony began with ancient rituals, moving inexorably toward the moment of abdication. Just as Thaxis reached for the crown of sovereignty, Vela stepped forward, her disguise falling away to reveal her royal garments. I challenge the right of succession, she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed plaza. Thaxis stands accused of treason against the 7 systems and attempted regicide. The crowd erupted as Vela presented their evidence, Thomas's analysis of the volcanic data, testimony from loyal guards, records of Thaxis's secret communications with separatist factions. Thaxis's face contorted with fury. You bring the word of an Earth primitive against mine, he snarled, pointing at Thomas. This is an outrage. The Council of Elders convened on the spot, their deliberation swift and unanimous. Thaxis was seized by royal guards as the head of the council pronounced judgment. The evidence is irrefutable. Thaxis is stripped of all titles and authority. Princess Vela, as rightful heir, shall ascend immediately. The coronation was conducted there in the Grand Plaza. Thomas watched with pride as Vela knelt to receive the crown of sovereignty, a circlet that seemed made of captured starlight. When she rose, Sovereign Vela of the 7 systems, her first decree shocked the assembly. The planet Earth is hereby recognized as a protectorate of the 7 systems. And I name Thomas Reed as Earth's official ambassador to our realm, with all rights and privileges thereof. Her eyes found his in the crowd, a private smile passing between them. Later, as celebration filled the city, they stood on a palace balcony overlooking the magnificent skyline. "Ambassador Reed," Vela said, leaning into him. "Your Majesty," he replied with a teasing smile, pulling her closer. "I still prefer when you call me Vela," she whispered against his lips. "And I prefer when you're just the woman I found on a volcano," he said, kissing her beneath the light of alien stars. Two worlds, forever connected by fire, ash, and love that transcended the boundaries between stars.